For much of European history, kings and prominent nobles had an acknowledged mistress at the royal court, referred to as the maîtresse-en-titre. These were the king's officially recognized mistresses. Far from hidden affairs, their position brought wealth and influence. They could sway political decisions, patronize artists, and shape the cultural pulse of the court. Some, like Madame de Pompadour in France, even became trusted advisors. Yet, this power had a price. The maîtresse-en-titre existed to please the king. Beauty, charm, and wit were her tools. But she was ultimately a possession, readily replaced if favor waned. Their lives were a fascinating mix of luxury and vulnerability, a dance of seduction and submission within the glittering but ruthless world of European royalty, with the sole goal of satisfying the king's desires.
Welcome to Kronos Chronicles. Let's unveil the secrets of time.
The courtesan's crown, love, intrigue, and the royal bedchamber. In the past, members of royalty had close-knit social circles, and the mistresses they chose were often aristocrats with noble titles. Even if these women didn't have a title, the king would grant them one, along with a monthly allowance and other perks of being the monarch's mistress. While princesses were taught to be proper and follow the rules, the mistresses of kings had a whole different set of lessons. Catering to powerful men accustomed to regular flattery of both their egos and more intimate parts, the chosen lover or king's maîtresse-en-titre had quite a task at hand. If prostitution claimed the title of the oldest profession, then securing the role of the king's chief mistress must have been a close second. Because the king could merrily lift the skirts of basically any woman or man in court, the female who captured his attention had to possess more than just beauty. Charm, wit, intelligence, grace, and the ability to predict her sometimes fickle lover's desires were essential qualities. While kings enjoyed themselves with other women, mistresses were expected to patiently wait in their quarters, either working on embroidery or planning extravagant dinners to keep their wandering lover entertained. While infidelity is generally disapproved of in today's monogamous relationships, it wasn't as taboo in English royal courts. Marriages among royal couples were primarily arranged for political, economic, and dynastic purposes. Royal couples were frequently mismatched, with kings and queens marrying individuals they didn't necessarily like or weren't compatible with. Monarchs would engage in extramarital relationships with mistresses and lovers to experience genuine romance or a fulfilling love life outside of their arranged marriages. Unlike the queen, whose position was secure, a mistress lived in a more precarious world. There would be no peace or rest for her if she wanted to keep her status, wealth, and influence intact. Given the splendor of her position, there was very little she wouldn't do to maintain her grip on the glittering prize of the king's attention. The price of royal desire, the king's obsession. As mistress, it was the first priority to satisfy any needs or desires the king had. This went far beyond just lovemaking. Some mistresses had to indulge in questionable fetishes to satisfy the king. One example is the skilled mistress Lola Montez, who was famous for her liaisons with King Ludwig of Bavaria in the mid-19th century. She was an Irish dancer and actress who, despite finding the king, who was 34 years her senior, physically unappealing, was drawn to the power and luxury his position offered. King Ludwig held an unusual fascination with her feet, expressing this in letters that hinted at his unconventional desires. While most women would have been repulsed by this strange desire, she was grateful for his preoccupation with her feet, given her lack of attraction towards him physically. She was able to keep him satisfied without much physical exertion, a welcome fact, especially since he had an unfortunate knob growing in the middle of his forehead. Whenever he did feel the need for more, she would often excuse herself on the grounds of being sick or menstruating. But he didn't seem to mind so terribly much. He was known to have odd tastes, sometimes asking her to wear a piece of flannel against her nether regions so that he could later take it along with him when they were separated. Despite the king's eccentric preferences, Lola understood the delicate balance of her position. She was a commodity, a carefully packaged and exotic distraction to amuse the monarch. The whispers of disapproval in the court only fueled her determination to solidify her position. To remain indispensable in Ludwig's eyes, she carefully crafted a persona that blended a hint of the unattainable with the illusion of passionate devotion. The court, however, buzzed with far more than scandalous gossip. Mistresses were not simply tools of royal pleasure. They were often cunning players in the elaborate chess game of court politics. The ambition of these women extended far beyond the king's bedchamber. They would carefully cultivate friendships with powerful nobles, bribe servants to obtain information, and use their influence with the king to sway decisions at the highest level. Alliances and rivalries shifted constantly, with mistresses vying to discredit one another. A juicy secret whispered at the right moment, a cleverly timed favor, or even strategic sabotage, all were weapons in their arsenal. Every glance, every seemingly casual comment, carried the potential for advancement. These women understood that true power lay not only in seducing the monarch, but in navigating the intricate web of relationships within the palace walls. The prizes in this courtly duel were substantial: wealth, titles, political appointments for family members, and sometimes the ear of the king on matters of state. The King's Curse, Insatiable Mistresses. Barbara Palmer, formerly Villiers and known as Lady Castlemaine, was the most infamous among Charles II's mistresses. She had a fiery temper, got involved in politics, and was very sexually active. Despite being married to John Palmer, she became Charles's mistress while he was in exile during the English Republic. Barbara was widely considered beautiful, as evident in numerous portraits of her. While being the mistress to a highly passionate king might seem satisfying, it wasn't the case for Barbara. She was a tempestuous woman, and in one alarming incident, she even threatened to harm her baby if Charles didn't comply with her wishes. She was labeled as Curse of the Nation, but the king, captivated by her physical charms, seemed to overlook her behavior. Even Charles II's robust libido couldn't fulfill Barbara, and she took other lovers, including her cousin John Churchill, later the first Duke of Marlborough. Charles once caught them together in Barbara's bedroom. In her later years, Barbara married a much younger man, Robert Fielding, who squandered her money. Adding to the complications, it was revealed that Fielding was already married, making their union bigamous. Barbara passed away in 1709 at the age of 63. Royal mistresses were often at the forefront of fashion, their lavish wardrobes as much a symbol of their status as their beauty. Court ladies eagerly copied their daring styles, leading to an extravagant arms race of luxurious fabrics, elaborate hairstyles, and excessive jewelry. However, this conspicuous consumption was not without critics. Moralists condemned the mistress's decadent spending, seeing it as a symbol of the corrupting influence wealth and power had upon an individual's character. Their clothing choices were particularly scrutinized, with revealing necklines and ostentatious baubles decried as inappropriate or even sinful displays of vanity. Despite this backlash, mistresses continued to drive fashion trends. Their portraits immortalized their extravagant looks, serving as inspiration for women across social classes. The desire to emulate these figures of glamour fueled industries for cosmetics, accessories, and bespoke clothing, showcasing the economic power a mistress could indirectly wield. The very existence of a royal mistress served as a societal flashpoint for debates about morality, virtue, and the corrupting influence of power. Religious figures thundered from their pulpits, denouncing licentiousness in the highest seats of power, and using the mistress as a stark cautionary tale about the dangers of female sexuality and ambition. Conversely, some intellectuals, especially during periods like the Enlightenment, used the mistress's existence to critique the hypocrisy of societal norms. They pointed to the absurdity of condemning mistresses for open affairs while accepting the silently tolerated infidelities of married noblemen. Some philosophers argued that the mistresses, bound by no vows and operating in a sphere where love was explicitly divorced from duty, were freer to pursue genuine affection than queens trapped in dynastic matches. The price of attention, love potions and king's desire. One royal mistress who went to great lengths to capture the attention of Louis XIV was the alluring and crafty Madame de Pompadour. She was determined to win him over, even though the French king already had a mistress who made him happy, and showed little interest in Madame de Montespan's advances. In 1667, hoping to break up the existing relationship, Madame de Montespan sought the help of a local witch living in a dark and crumbling house on the outskirts of Paris. For a hefty fee, the witch offered various services, from reading palms and communicating with the dead to providing beauty lotions, performing abortions, or casting spells to harm enemies. Madame de Montespan, residing at the French court, seized every opportunity to dine with the king, slipping love potions into his wine and applying unpleasant concoctions of dead babies' blood, bones, and intestines to his meat in an effort to win his affections. And it worked. He eventually fell deeply in love with her, leading him to end his relationship with his then pregnant mistress, Louise de la Vallière. Due to the rich French cuisine and the limited exercise mistresses often engaged in outside the bedroom, Madame de Montespan in Louis XIV's court would have herself rubbed down with pomade for 2 hours at a time, several days a week, while lying naked. She would also occasionally retreat to a health spa, where she would starve herself before returning to court, stunning the king with her newly slim figure. Unlike wives, royal mistresses could be dismissed at any time without any financial settlement. Although they lived luxuriously while with the king, this lifestyle was subject to change based on his favor. A mistress's influential friends at court supported her as long as she retained power, expecting favors in return. At any moment, she could go from the height of magnificence to the depths of poverty and disgrace. A savvy mistress would start collecting for her retirement as soon as she entered the king's embrace, ensuring a comfortable lifestyle to cushion her inevitable fall. A coveted title, such as countess, marquise, or duchess, was also a sought-after part of the arrangement. The presence of a royal mistress represented a public humiliation for the queen. It was a constant, visible reminder of her husband's infidelity and her powerlessness to stop it. This complex situation evoked a range of responses from the public, from pity to condemnation, and forced queens to navigate a treacherous path to maintain their dignity and position. The queen's suffering was often acknowledged. Sympathetic subjects understood that the king's infidelity was not an indictment of her as a wife or woman, but a reflection of the societal double standards of the era. Queens, bound by duty and tradition, had few options for recourse. This pity was often reflected in art and literature. The sad queen was a recurring archetype, particularly in ballads or plays meant for popular consumption. These works emphasized the queen's lonely dignity, in contrast to the frivolous behavior of the mistress. Portraying the queen as a tragic figure could be a subtle form of social critique, highlighting the injustice her position forced upon her. Some queens found solace in religion. By emphasizing piety and devotion, they created a moral distance between themselves and the court's excesses. Public demonstrations of faith, such as charitable giving or patronage of religious institutions, reinforced the queen's image as a virtuous woman, wronged by her husband, but rising above the scandal through her connection to God. At the king's mercy, power and precarity. When it came to holding the esteemed title of maîtresse-en-titre, nobody surpassed Madame de Pompadour, the principal mistress of Louis XV of France from 1745 to 1751. She exemplified the challenges of her role, catering to her impulsive lover's every whim and shaping her entire existence to ensure his pleasure. Privately, she often claimed to be treated too well by the king, who had an insatiable sexual appetite and sought numerous encounters in the satin sheets each day. Despite enjoying the attention of the court and the king, Madame de Pompadour struggled with frigidity, frequently oscillating between sickness and health. Her position demanded a toll physically, emotionally, and mentally, leaving her frequently exhausted by Louis's expectations. In an effort to revitalize her own libido and keep pace with the energetic king, Madame de Pompadour adopted a diet featuring celery, truffles, and vanilla. However, this unconventional approach only made her unwell. During those times, women were willing to go to great lengths to remain pleasing to their powerful lovers. Unlike many mistresses who were discarded when the initial allure of romance waned, Madame de Pompadour managed to transform her relationship with Louis XV into one of friendship and deep confidences. In the 18th century French court at Versailles, Louis XV's realm was unique, filled with opulent luxuries and scandalous affairs. All eyes were on the king, and every woman at court sought his attention. Madame de Pompadour kept Louis content by offering him an escape from the prying eyes of the court and a haven for his favorite indulgences. She adorned her sumptuous apartments with exquisite fabrics, enchanting flowers, and the finest wine money could buy. She became adept at understanding his moods, reading his expressions, and discerning when he concealed anger or frustration behind his royal facade. In essence, she molded herself into his ideal companion, even at the expense of her own joy and comfort. Madame de Pompadour's knowledge extended beyond the intimate realm. She appreciated architecture, understood botany and the Versailles gardens, and even dabbled in the art of gem cutting. Recognizing the importance of keeping the king engaged at all times, she made it her full-time job to be fabulous, never leaving her apartments in case the king needed food, conversation, or intimacy. She couldn't display fatigue, illness, anger, or boredom. Even when her 10-year-old daughter and her father passed away in the same week, she concealed her pain and mourning, fearing it might upset the king. Observers noted that she was likely just as unhappy inside as she appeared happy on the outside. In the French court, there was always an expectation that mistresses would receive wealth, but English policies were not as generous. Charles II, though powerful, faced challenges in giving gifts to his mistress Lady Castlemaine due to objections from court officials who believed taxpayers' money shouldn't support mistresses. Despite this, Lady Castlemaine persuaded Charles to give her Christmas gifts and even took items from the King's jewel house in the Tower of London. A royal mistress's position, built on the shifting sands of the King's affection, always carried the risk of a dramatic fall. Changes in the monarch's desires, political intrigues, the rise of a younger rival. Any of these could spell disaster for a woman whose entire livelihood and social status depended on royal favor. When the king's interest waned, a mistress faced a harsh reality. Overnight, she could transform from a powerful figure at court to a social pariah. Understanding the options, or lack thereof, available to these women sheds light on both their vulnerability and the strategies some employed to secure a future beyond the king's affections. The most common, and sometimes the kindest fate of a discarded mistress, was exile. The king might provide a modest allowance and a remote estate to ensure a degree of comfort, while removing her from the scandal and intrigue of court life. Alternatively, she could be sent away with nothing, left to rely on the charity of distant relatives or the goodwill of former allies. Exile meant not only losing wealth and power, but facing enduring social stigma. The whispers that followed a mistress even to the countryside branded her as used, discarded, and morally tainted. Her reputation was in tatters, and while certain aristocratic circles might tolerate her presence out of necessity, true social acceptance was unlikely. For some fallen mistresses, particularly in devoutly Catholic countries, the convent provided a haven. Here, they could escape the public eye and gain a measure of respectability as penitents. However, entering a convent did not guarantee a comfortable life. Strict rules, limited freedoms, and the potential hostility of other nuns meant this option was more akin to a gilded cage than a sanctuary. The convent also served a political purpose for the king. Placing a former mistress behind convent walls neatly removed a potential source of scandal or intrigue and projected an image of royal piety after a period of excess. Perhaps the most desirable outcome for a discarded mistress was to secure a strategic marriage. Ideally, she would find a wealthy, older nobleman willing to overlook her past in exchange for access to her connections and the remaining wealth she might have accumulated. Such unions, however, were not easy to arrange. Her reputation was a significant hurdle, and most noblemen were wary of associating themselves too closely with a figure tainted by the king's previous affections. Still, some women managed to secure advantageous marriages. Those with particularly cunning minds might even use the threat of releasing memoirs detailing their time with the king as a bargaining chip to secure a higher title or greater wealth from a potential husband. For many mistresses, none of the above options were truly viable. Lacking powerful allies, significant personal wealth, or the ability to secure a husband, they faced a bleak future on the fringes of society. These women often ended up living in obscurity, their former wealth depleted, their names spoken only in hushed tones and with a mix of pity and scorn. Some mistresses, desperate and isolated, might resort to using their knowledge of court secrets or past influence to blackmail former allies. Others turned to gambling, drink, or other self-destructive behaviors. In the worst-case scenarios, a few might even end their lives in poverty and destitution, a far cry from the opulent bedrooms they once inhabited. In this historical context, a mistress, though elevated compared to common prostitutes, still faced scrutiny. While most women kept their affairs private, royal mistresses proudly flaunted their relationships, gaining distinction. Their reputation hinged on engaging in extramarital affairs, and unlike criticism against the king, people could freely express opinions about the mistress. To endure the judgmental and spiteful comments, royal mistresses needed extraordinary strength, willing to do anything to stay in the royal spotlight a bit longer.